Hello everyone, this is Bruce Bolton again, here bringing you the third installment of our video series on how to play When There Were Seven Kingdoms, card-driven game, based on the wars of Westeros before the conquest. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the game cards, the most important aspect of how a player actually plays the game. When There Were Seven Kingdoms was referred to in the gaming industry as a card-driven game. All players every turn are dealt a variable number of cards. Each player then in sequence plays a card as part of their action. This determines what that player is doing for that turn. So we'll go over this in great detail throughout the video, explaining each of the cards and how they can be used and played, and hopefully give you a better understanding of the basic game mechanics. In There Were Seven Kingdoms, there is a starter deck of 60 cards. These cards are shuffled at the beginning of the game, and at the beginning of turn 1, each player is dealt out a number of cards based on their starting power, which again I'll show you an example of later in this video. Once all players have been dealt their cards, the first player then starts off the game by playing his or her first card, resolves that action, and then moves on to the second player, who resolves their action, then to the third, fourth, etc., and so forth. When all 7 players have gone, it goes back to the original first player again, who plays another card. The turn ends when all players have played all of their cards or have passed. We'll get to that later. And all actions are completed. So, in this deck of 60 is your initial deck size, but once the cards have been exhausted, they get reshuffled and are reused again. But on later turns of the game, on turn 4, 30 cards are added to the deck, and on turn 7, an additional 25 cards are added to the deck. These cards have impacts within the later part of the game, and are moderately important too as the game gets closer to winter. You'll see more cards that affect weather and more cards that affect rulers possibly dying, more cards affecting the wildlings or hill tribes getting rebellious. So, in the game, there are 5 different types of cards that you can use throughout the game. In this picture here, we see the 5 types of cards. On the top row, we have a house card or home card. Each player gets 1 to 2, depending on the house they are playing, home cards in their hand. The next card in the middle is an event card. These are the most common cards in the game. Then we have a battle card. This would be used when armies or navies are fighting. On the bottom row, we have a mandatory cards. They are similar to event cards, but they have the effect that the event on the card must be played. There is no decision on the player's part whether or not to use the card for the event as he or she wishes. And lastly, there is a response card. These can be played after an opponent has taken an action, has played a card, or if there's something that you have done during your turn, you may use a response card to enhance your turn. We'll now talk about each of the cards individually. This is the House Stark home card. All types of cards have a basic 6-point layout. Number 1 is the number in a yellow shield in the upper left-hand corner. This is the card's CP, or command point value. All cards can be used in either 2 functions. Either A, they're going to use their command points to activate their formations, their armies, to buy new troops, to conduct trade, to move. There's a various numbers of actions that any player can take with their command points. We'll go into those in a later video. So the player will either play it for the command points, or B, they'll play it for the event, which is the arrow with the number 4 on it. So the other points of the card are number 2, stating that this is the House Stark home card for just clarity's sake. Point number 3 is the card's title, Fury of the Northman, and the card's individual artwork. 4 is the event of the card. If the player chooses not to use the card for its CP value, he would be using it, or she would be using it for the event itself. Number 5, and not all cards have these, is flavor quote, something to just go along for a little more stylized for the card itself. And number 6 is the card's number of registry in the deck. That's just maintained for basically order and keeping track of the game itself. It's not a major impact of what the card can or cannot do. So now with the home cards, during every turn, the player will have their home card in their hand, and they have to use it at some point, either for CPs or the event throughout the turn. Unlike normal cards, when they are used, which are discarded, the home card is simply turned over, face down, and placed in front of you. At the beginning of your turn, when you draw your cards, your home card or cards go right back in your hand. So for every turn of the game, you will have the ability to use your home card at least once. The home cards are basically reflecting a particular strength of that particular major power. So in this example, the Fury of the Northman, their event allows them to re-roll dice in a battle, which is pretty useful. So if they attack an opponent or are defending against an opponent and they do particularly poorly and they still have this card in their hand, they can re-roll their attacks and hopefully do better, and hopefully win. So other house cards reflect their particular major powers, advantages or disadvantages. So we won't go into every single one of them right here. The next type of card, the event card, is the most basic and common card you'll find in the game. The event card does not have, by the number 2 Loki spot, does not have any particular notation above it. Any cards that don't have any notation are automatically event cards. And they have all the other, basic symbols that the house card does. The number 1, their CP value, their card title, the Essos Free Company and artwork, the event, and the colorful quote to go along with it. Most of the time, you'll be using event cards throughout your action phases to either move your troops, to take actions, or in this case, to play the event to get some sellswords in your armies. The number 3 example is a battle card. Battle cards are only useful, as the title says, in a battle between field armies or in a naval battle. All battle cards have a blue notation at the top of the card art, and their title will also always be in blue as well. This particular battle card also has a specific requirement. This battle card can only be played by House Gardener for the event. If a different house had the card in their hand, they can only make use of the card for its CP value. Most battle cards are generic and can be used by any power. This particular card, just for this example state, does show you one that is family specific. This one being for House Gardener, when they fight a field battle, their regular troops are much more effective. This being the strength of House Gardener's chivalry and having numerous knights. Example number 4 here is a mandatory card. Mandatory cards are pretty much event cards, but the player who has a mandatory event card in their hand has to play it for the event. You have no choice in the matter whatsoever. But you do have the added benefit that after you play the event, you still get to use the card's command point value, in this case 3, after the event has occurred. Most mandatory event cards are generally global impact events. Someone's leader has died, there's a dramatic change in the weather, economic problems for everybody. There are not many mandatory cards, but they are, let's say, have broad impact on the game as a whole as compared to a normal event card, which generally affects one player and one player only. In this case, you'll notice it's a famine card, which spreads a number of pillage markers throughout the map. And since you don't really want to play this, because pillage markers are bad, but it's famine, shit happens, so nothing you can do about that. And the last type of card is a response card. Response cards are, like the title says, are played either in response to another player's action or use of a card, or in some cases, this one in particular, after you have done something and you wish to make that event or action even more potent. Response cards, like in the number 1 notation, are always in purple, and their title is always in purple as well, in this case looting from the rich. All response cards below their title will have an italicized statement listing the requirements of when you can play that response card. In this particular one, play after you assault and capture a key space or capital fortress. So if you're laying siege to someone's key city or fortress and you win, you're able to play this card for its event, in which case you draw and keep another card from the losing player. So you're kind of weakening them and strengthening your hand. This card also has a third important notation. Various cards within the deck will have these notations. If you look by the number 3 arrow, you see it has a W3 at the bottom of it. Certain cards will also have on the opposite side an HT notation. These cards represent an increased strength in the wildings of the north or the hill tribes in the mountains and the moon. After you've played this card for either its CP value or for the response event, the wilding army, in this case, would have its army strength increased by 3. So no matter what you use this card for, that wilding strength will always be increased. Or if, conversely, there was a hill tribe notation on the other side, the hill tribe army would be increased in size. You don't have any other effect in the game besides that. So, moving on, we'll discuss how players actually draw cards during the turn. From the previous video, we'll use the House Stark example. At the beginning of turn 1, the House Stark would put down their key location counters on the map, and as you see, they put down 5. And on the last marker, open space, by the number 1 arrow, you see that they have, on the top it says 4 cards. So when it's the Stark turn to draw cards, they will draw 4 cards plus their home cards, so giving them a starting hand of 5 cards. Now certain rulers generate bonus cards. If you look here in this example, King Osric the Fair, his notation by the number 2, he has bonus cards 0. So this particular ruler doesn't give you any bonus cards, but some rulers do give you 1 bonus cards. Very few very powerful rulers, might give you 2 bonus cards. So that's not very common. So only a few rulers have that capability. So using this example, the Stark player, when it's his turn, draws 5 cards, gets his home card back in his hand, and gets his opening hand. Here we see an example of what the Stark player has drawn. Stark player has in the top upper left-hand corner his house card and the 4 other cards he or she has drawn for this first turn. He's got 1 5 card, 1 3 card, and 2 2 cards. The top card, the War of Atlantis, is probably unlikely he'll be playing on turn 1. It's a very powerful war card and has a great deal of requirement of troops that the Starks would have to send off to war against Volantis. It can be impressive if they pull off such a victory, but in an early part of the game it's unlikely the Stark or any player would play War of Volantis card for the event right off the bat. It'll be more useful later in the game. Stark does have some nice, the 3 and the 2 cards is some nice cards here for the Starks. The Pentus Bankers allow them, when they play that, to draw 2 more cards from the deck, but on the following turn they would have a -1 card to their draw. But they can negate that with the Bravosi Investments card. that allows them to gain a card on the following turn. So the Stars kind of lucked out with this particular draw, with being able to draw 2 cards, and they can pretty much negate the negative impact it would have later on. And lastly, they have a battle card in their hand, Crossbows, so if they get into any kind of field battle or naval combat this first turn, they get some extra dice. So a pretty average hand, and should be pretty useful to the Starks right off the bat. So that's all for this particular video. Hope you get an idea of what cards can do, or how they're used. Now, because there are 60 different cards in the deck and no one's played it before, it's hard to actually build a strategy right off the top of your head before you've played the game. Most of the cards are pretty, let's say, average in command point value, and can have negative effects and can have positive effects. So it's really hard to every turn plan out how your strategy is going to develop until you see your cards. So maybe you have a great hand one turn, and maybe you have a terrible hand the following turn. That's the interesting point of the game. You're just not too sure where the cards are going to take you. So every turn is a mystery. So that's it for this video. We'll see you next time, and we'll start covering diplomacy and most likely how to move land troops around on the board and fight battles. Till then, thank you. Goodbye.